I'm so sorry, I didn't mean to, Lana cooed, her voice dripping with fake concern, while the smug smile on her face said otherwise. She didn't spill the coffee by accident. She aimed it, slow, cold, right onto Marissa's shimmering silk dress. The room fell into a dead hush. Forks paused midair. Conversations died mid-sentence. Marissa didn't flinch. She calmly reached for a napkin, dabbed the dark stain from her shoulder, then looked up with a gaze that didn't shout, but promised something far more dangerous. And that was only the beginning. You're watching the wrong table. A story about quiet revenge, unspoken racism, and power that doesn't need to raise its voice to burn everything down. If you think this was just about spilled coffee, you're wrong. Let us know where you're watching from and subscribe so you don't miss what happens next. Stay with us. Because of Marissa's silence, that's not surrender. It's a strategy. It started the way storms always do, quietly. A slow velvet night had fallen over Manhattan. The skyline shimmered, not with stars but with ambition. Steel and glass glowing gold. Penthouses pulsing like the hearts of gods. Down below, a different kind of theater played out. The streets were wet with recent rain, reflecting taxi lights like liquid fire, and every passerby walked fast, dressed well, and spoke in curated tones. On West 72nd, nestled between a private art gallery and a jewelry showroom, sat a narrow black door with no sign, just a small brass plaque that read, Maison de Claire. Most people didn't know what it was. Those who never called it a restaurant. They called it an escape. Inside, chandeliers hung like captured starlight. White linen glistened under candlelight. Wine glasses sparkled as if polished with breath. Every table carried the hush of wealth, conversations that never raised their voices, only eyebrows. It was the kind of place where no one asked for the menu. They already knew it, where your last name spoke before you ever opened your mouth. And tonight, everything about the atmosphere whispered one word, control, until she walked in. The hostess didn't notice her at first, not really. She clocked the heels, the dress, the gleam of metallic silk. But it wasn't until the woman stepped into the full glow of the lobby chandelier that people looked up. She didn't announce herself. She just was. Presence, not performance. Her name was Marissa Royce, and she didn't belong there. Not because she wasn't beautiful, she was breathtaking. Not because she wasn't elegant, she made elegance look instinctual. But because she was black, alone, unaccompanied. And that dress, that body, that face, didn't come with the quiet fear most black women wore when they entered spaces like this. She walked like she owned the room, or had once burned it down and built it back better. Her dress was sleek in gold, catching the low light like fire trapped in fabric. Her hair was long, dark, straight with soft waves at the ends, falling over her bare shoulders like a whisper meant only for her. There was no jewelry, no bag, no visible ID, just Marissa, and silence followed her like a shadow. The hostess recovered quickly. "Good evening," she said, trying not to sound surprised. "Do you have a reservation?" Marissa didn't answer right away. She let her gaze float over the room. She saw everything. Who was drinking? Who was watching? Who was pretending not to? Then she returned her eyes to the hostess and offered a small, unreadable smile. "I won't be needing one," she said softly. Her voice was low and even, measured, not arrogant, certain. The hostess blinked. "I see. Well, we do have a wait tonight. The lounge is available. I'll take the window table." She said it like it was the only table that mattered, like it was already hers. The hostess followed her gaze and nearly choked. The window table wasn't just any table. It was the table. The one reserved for billionaires, Broadway royalty, and politicians with a whisper problem. It had been empty all night, waiting for a couple with a notoriously late arrival habit. And now this woman, this unknown, unscheduled, beautifully black woman, was making a quiet claim. "I'm afraid that table is available," Marissa said. And with that, she walked. Not rushed, not hesitant. She simply moved, her heels clicking softly across marble, the sound of ownership. Her stride was relaxed but exact. She didn't look back. The maître d' glanced at the hostess with alarm, but before he could step in, Marissa had already arrived at the table and pulled out the chair herself. She sat, crossed one leg over the other, and rested her hands in her lap, calm as a queen waiting for the world to remember who she was. Waiters whispered. A man at the bar tilted his head. A woman in pearls blinked, then checked her clutch for her phone. A few looked away quickly, like they were watching a car wreck they weren't supposed to enjoy. But no one said a word. From the far side of the dining room, behind the service station, Lana watched it all unfold. 28, white, overworked, underpaid. She'd been in that restaurant for 3 years and still couldn't afford to eat at the bar. She knew the menu better than the chef. She hated every second of it. Lana squinted toward the window. She doesn't have a reservation? She asked. The hostess, now rattled, shook her head. No, she just walked in. Lana let out a dry laugh. Of course she did. The maitre d' stepped over, eyes darting. Someone's got to serve her. Lana, that's your section. Lana froze. You're kidding me. He wasn't. With a forced exhale and a manufactured smile, Lana picked up her tray and made her way to the window table. Marissa didn't look up when Lana approached. She was watching the city outside like it belonged to her, and she was just checking in on it. Her posture didn't shift. Her shoulders didn't square. Lana stood beside the table for 3 full seconds before clearing her throat. Good evening. Welcome to Maison du Clair. Still no reaction. Lana felt heat rise to her face. Was she being ignored? Then slowly Marissa turned her head. Her gaze landed on Lana. Not sharp, not warm, just measured. I'll have a black coffee, she said. No wine, no appetizers, no fanfare, just that. Lana blinked. We have a 3-course minimum for this section. Marissa smiled. Just a little. I'm aware. I'll still have the coffee. For a split second, Lana stood there, blinking. Then she turned on her heel and walked back toward the kitchen, her fists clenched tighter than her fake smile. Behind her, Marissa returned her gaze to the window, calm, still, patient. She hadn't come for dinner. She'd come for something else entirely. And the first course was already served. Lana hated the way her shoes squeaked on the polished floor. It made her feel exposed. Every step from the window table back to the kitchen rang in her ears louder than the soft jazz playing overhead. She knew the table, was trouble the moment that woman sat in it, and now she'd been assigned to serve her. Of course, because when things went sideways at Maison du Clair, it always rolled downhill straight into Lana's section. And this wasn't just a table. It was a test she hadn't studied for, and her patience was already paper thin. In the kitchen, the steam hissed like it was laughing at her. She yanked a clean cup from the shelf, grabbed the carafe, and slammed the coffee pot into place harder than she needed to. Her reflection in the brushed steel fridge caught her eye. Pale skin, tired eyes, hair tucked up in a ponytail that gave up 3 hours ago. This wasn't the life she pictured when she left art school. It wasn't even the backup plan. This was survival with a name tag. She poured the coffee and let it overflow slightly, not bothering to wipe the rim. Maybe she'd get lucky. Maybe the woman in the gold dress would hate it, complain, ask for someone else. Let someone else dance that tightrope. As Lana stepped out of the kitchen, she caught snippets of murmured conversation. Table 9 was whispering about the woman in gold, and Table 4 had pulled out their phones under the linen to sneak photos. A group at the bar was half laughing, half watching. All eyes, even the ones pretending not to stare, were on Marissa. But no one did anything. No one asked who she was or why she thought she belonged. They just waited for the scene to write itself. And it was always women like Lana who got handed the pen and told to finish the sentence. She walked back to the window table with the coffee cup trembling slightly on the saucer. She hated that it trembled. She wasn't scared. She was annoyed, insulted, out of place in her own place. As she reached the table, Marissa didn't look at her. She was staring out the window still, as if the city skyline was more interesting than any human in the room. Lana cleared her throat. Black coffee, she said flatly, setting the cup down with a little more force than necessary. Marissa didn't thank her. She didn't even blink. That bothered Lana more than it should have. She lingered at the edge of the table, waiting for a complaint, a question, some acknowledgement. Nothing came, just silence. Lana tucked the tray under her arm and said, "If you change your mind about eating something, the menu is on the table." Still no response. She added quieter, but with an edge she didn't hide. 3-course minimum. House rules. That finally got Marissa's eyes. She turned slowly, her gaze settling on Lana like cool mist. Not hostile, just deliberate. "Thank you," Marissa said with a smile that felt more like punctuation than gratitude. And that was it. Lana turned and walked away fuming, not because of what Marissa said, but because of how she said it. Like she didn't care one bit what Lana thought of her, like she knew she didn't have to. In the prep station, Lana muttered under her breath, ignoring the look from the bartender. She didn't know who that woman thought she was, but she sure as hell wasn't a regular. Regulars didn't order coffee. They ordered legacy wines, butter-poached scallops, and $1,000 tomahawks. They wore tailored jackets, not skin-tight gold dresses that shimmered every time they moved. Regulars gave tips before they sat down. This woman had shown up, said nothing, ordered coffee, and claimed a table that wasn't hers, and now everyone was watching Lana like it was her job to handle it, like her salary covered managing social landmines. She hated how people assumed things about her, too, that she was privileged because she was white, that she had choices. No one saw the eviction notice shoved behind her fridge magnets or the hours she spent spoon-feeding her mother between shifts. No one knew that her boyfriend, ex, technically, had cleared out his half of the closet while she was at work, or that she hadn't painted anything in nearly 2 years. They saw a tired woman in a clean apron and assumed that meant she was fine. Just like she looked at Marissa and saw someone trying too hard to look expensive, too confident to be real. But that was the thing about Lana. She didn't hate people easily. She hated ideas, entitlement, arrogance, people who walked into rooms and made others feel small just by existing. And right now, that woman by the window was a living, breathing idea that Lana had spent her whole life trying to dodge. She didn't even realize how tightly she was gripping the tray until she felt the edge dig into her palm. As she took another order at table 3, Lana stole a glance back at the window. Marissa was still there, still staring out at the city, her coffee untouched. She wasn't scrolling a phone, wasn't reading a menu, wasn't doing anything. It was unnerving, like she was waiting for something. Lana didn't like it. She didn't like that she had to serve someone who made her feel invisible in her own space. It was her floor, her section, and yet somehow Marissa had shifted the gravitational pull of the whole damn room. Back at the service bar, Lana leaned on the counter and exhaled. "She's not eating," she whispered to herself. "Why the hell is she even here?" No one answered. No one needed to. The vibe had changed the moment Marissa stepped through the door, and Lana felt it in her bones. This wasn't just a customer. This was a statement. And somewhere, deep down, under the layers of resentment and exhaustion, Lana felt something she refused to name: threat. Because when a woman like Marissa walks in without permission and acts like she owns the place, it makes you question who actually does. It started with the coffee. Still untouched, the dark liquid sat quietly in its delicate porcelain cup, as though it too were waiting for something to happen. Lana watched it from across the room, her eyes twitching toward the table more often than she meant to. The woman hadn't taken a sip. She hadn't looked at the menu. She hadn't moved. She just sat there, a statue in silk, watching the city through the glass like she was waiting for it to blink first. And somehow Lana felt that coffee staring back at her, accusing, expectant, challenging. Lana hated the tension, not the kind that boiled over into shouting or drama. She could handle that. No, she hated the quiet kind, the kind that simmered beneath pleasantries and fake smiles, the kind where one person holds power without ever having to prove it. And right now, that's what this woman radiated. She didn't have to speak loudly to take up space. She simply breathed, and the room shifted around her. Lana told herself it wasn't about race. She told herself it was about rules, about service standards, about the integrity of the section. But beneath that thin veil of professionalism was something darker, something she'd been trained not to name, even in her own mind. When Lana made her way back to the table, she brought a glass of water, more for herself than for the guest. It gave her an excuse to return, to engage, to put some boundaries around the strange, disarming presence sitting in her VIP seat. As she placed the water down, she said, "Still deciding?" and added a polite smile she didn't feel. Marissa turned her head slowly, the movement so fluid it almost looked choreographed. Her expression was unreadable, but her tone was razor-sharp and casual all at once. "I've already decided. I'm just watching." Lana felt the words land before she fully understood them. Watching what? Watching who? She tried to deflect, tried to keep the upper hand by shifting back into server mode. "We do recommend at least an appetizer with your drink. It helps with table flow." Marissa smiled, faint and calm, the kind that makes you nervous because it holds no effort. "I'm not here to eat. I'm here to be seen." That caught Lana off guard. She opened her mouth to reply, then closed it. Her thoughts scrambled, and when they settled, irritation rose in their place. "Look," she said, her voice tightening just slightly. "This table is usually booked weeks in advance. People wait months for that view." Marissa tilted her head. "So you're saying I should be more grateful?" Lana wasn't sure how to respond. She hadn't said that exactly, but something about the way Marissa put it made it sound like she had. She tried again. "I'm saying a lot of people walk in here thinking it's just another restaurant. It's not. This is a certain kind of space, and we're expected to maintain a standard." Marissa leaned back in her chair and crossed her legs. "Interesting. And what kind of standard do you think I don't meet?" Lana froze. Her throat went dry. Her mind searched for a neutral phrase, a soft landing, but the damage was already done. The silence between them stretched, not long, not loud, but heavy. Lana swallowed and forced a smile. "I didn't mean that it sounded." Marissa didn't move. "Didn't you?" she said, her voice soft enough to sting. "Because to me, it sounded like you think you know who belongs here and who doesn't." Lana opened her mouth again, but no words came. The dining room was still bustling, still full of clinking glasses and polished laughs. But this table had gone still, like its own little pocket of air, too dense to breathe. Marissa finally looked away, back to the skyline. "You know," she said after a moment, "places like this weren't built for women like me. Not really. They'll serve me. They'll smile, but they never stop watching, waiting for me to prove I earned my seat." Lana, unsure whether to defend herself or leave, stood rooted, gripping the edge of her tray like it might anchor her to something solid. "That's not fair," she quietly. "Maybe not," Marissa replied, "but it's accurate." She reached for her glass of water and took a slow sip, then placed it down with precision. "I've spent my whole life walking into rooms that whisper behind my back. This one's no different. The only question is whether I let it define me or redefine you." Lana didn't understand what that meant. Not fully, but it made her feel exposed, like something she'd tried to keep hidden had been dragged out and set gently on the table between them. She muttered, "We're all just doing our jobs." Marissa's gaze snapped back to hers. "No, you're doing what you've been taught. There's a difference." That landed like a punch wrapped in velvet, and Lana took a small step back, suddenly cold despite the heat in the room. She didn't like this woman. She didn't like her dress, her tone, or her eyes. But more than anything, she didn't like the way Marissa saw her. Not as a worker, not as a stranger, but as something to be revealed. A manager passed by in the distance, casting a glance toward their table. Lana quickly straightened, falling back into the role expected of her. "Let me know if you need anything else," she said, her tone tight and falsely sweet. Marissa nodded once. "I will. But you already gave me everything I came for." Lana blinked. "What does that mean?" But Marissa didn't answer. She turned back to the window, and the conversation was over. Lana walked away, her spine stiff, her heart beating a little too fast. She told herself it was just another table, just another night, just another customer who thought she was too clever for her own good. But something about the exchange had scraped too close to the truth. A small conversation, a polite verbal spar, but it left a cut. Not deep, not obvious, but it bled anyway. Lana stood in the service corridor, staring at the stacked plates in front of her like they might offer some kind of answer. Her heart was still racing from that conversation, And no matter how many times she told herself to shake it off, something about Marissa's voice, low, sharp, unbothered, kept replaying in her head. You're doing what you've been taught. That line landed harder than any complaint a customer had ever made. Lana had always thought of herself as tough, but those words had found a crack in her armor and slipped right through. Now she couldn't decide if she was angry, ashamed, or both. The bartender gave her a sideways glance as she passed by, then returned to polishing glasses. No one said anything to her, yet, but Lana could feel the eyes. Not all of them. Just enough. The kind of eyes that didn't accuse you, but watched to see if you'd step out of line. That was the thing about working in a place like this. Everything was unspoken, but nothing went unnoticed. She knew she wasn't supposed to confront guests, wasn't supposed to get drawn into passive-aggressive games, wasn't supposed to make things personal. But that's exactly what had happened, and now she felt like she had to win, even if she didn't know what that meant anymore. She didn't want to admit it, but Marissa had gotten under her skin. The way she sat there, so sure of herself, so calm, so irritatingly unreadable, felt like a provocation Lana couldn't ignore. It wasn't that she envied the woman, or feared her, or even disliked her outright. No, it was worse than that. Marissa had made Lana feel small in a room she'd spent years surviving in, and no one made Lana feel small. Not anymore. She took a deep breath, smoothed down the front of her apron, and stepped back onto the floor. Her section was quiet. Guests were chatting, sipping wine, grazing on foie gras and dry-aged lamb. But the tension around that table remained, coiled and silent, like a string pulled taut and waiting to snap. The coffee cup was still untouched. Of course it was. Marissa hadn't moved an inch, as if to make a point without saying a word. And Lana hated that. She hated that the game had already started and that she was the only one still pretending it wasn't happening. As she neared the table again, she noticed something shift in her own body. Her walk slowed, her shoulders squared, and her hand gripped the tray tightly. She was no longer just serving coffee. She was delivering a message. And maybe it was petty, maybe it was stupid, but it felt like the only power she still had left in this room. The only way to prove to Marissa, and maybe to herself, that she still controlled something. She reached the table and stood for a moment, not speaking, just watching Marissa as she gazed out at the lights of the city. The skyline glittered behind her, and the silk of her dress shimmered in the low candlelight. Lana knew she wouldn't get a second chance at this. It had to look natural. It had to look innocent. She'd rehearsed the move in her mind a dozen times on the walk over, telling herself it was just a slip, just a little accident, nothing that couldn't happen to anyone. She stepped forward, adjusted the saucer ever so slightly, and in a single motion that was too fluid to be anything but planned, she tilted the edge of the tray and let the cup slide. Slow, deliberate, almost elegant. The coffee splashed across Marissa's shoulder and down her chest in a dark, spreading stain that soaked through the silk like ink. It wasn't hot. Lana had made sure of that, but it was obvious, humiliating, intentional. Lana gasped, hand to her mouth, the perfect mimic of surprise. "Oh my God, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to," she said, but her lips curled slightly, the edges of her mouth betraying the smile she tried to suppress. The restaurant went silent. Utensils paused in midair. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. And every head in the room turned, pulled by the gravitational force of a moment that shattered the illusion of decorum. Marissa sat still, eyes closed for just a second, her fingers tightening ever so slightly around the arm of her chair. She didn't speak. She didn't look up. She simply reached for the linen napkin beside her plate and began to blot the front of her dress, slowly, methodically, as though nothing out of the ordinary had occurred. Lana stood frozen, her expression a mask of regret that didn't quite reach her eyes. For a moment she felt something dangerous, satisfaction, the kind that comes not from victory but from retaliation, the giddy sense that, for once, she had the upper hand. Then Marissa looked up. Her gaze met Lana's with a clarity that burned without raising its voice. No anger, no shock, just understanding, and something else, something colder, calculated. Marissa smiled, not wide, not warm, but slow and sharp like the edge of a blade. Accidents happen, she said softly. Then she rose. Every movement was smooth, unhurried, as if she had all the time in the world and no reason to explain herself. Her dress clung to her body, heavy now with dampness, the coffee stain blooming like a bruise across gold silk. She adjusted the strap on her shoulder, gathered her things, which were minimal, and glanced once around the restaurant. Everyone was watching, no one was breathing, and yet no one dared move. She turned back to Lana, held her gaze one final time, and then, without a word, walked toward the exit, her heels tapping a steady haunting rhythm against the floor. No shouting, no threats, just silence, thick and electric, trailing in her wake like perfume. Lana stood there long after she was gone, her hands clenched at her sides. Her smile vanished. The satisfaction drained from her as quickly as it had come, because something in Marissa's eyes had made a promise. And promises like that don't get broken, they get delivered. The next day at Maison de Claire began the same way it always did, with polish and perfection. The white linen tablecloths had been pressed smooth, the wine glasses lined up like crystal soldiers, and the scent of imported citrus cleaner floated faintly through the air. Lana arrived 10 minutes early, wearing a fresh uniform and the ghost of a headache. She hadn't slept much. The image of Marissa's smile, the quiet, unsettling curve of it, had taken root in her brain and bloomed like a parasite overnight. Lana had laughed it off at first, told herself the woman was just trying to save face, that her silence was the silence of someone defeated. But doubt had a way of whispering in moments of quiet, and Lana was beginning to hear it everywhere. She tried to push it down, to reclaim the confidence that had made her tip the coffee tray the night before. She even convinced herself briefly that she had won. No one had scolded her. No one had called it out. The managers hadn't said a word about the incident, and as far as Lana could tell, Marissa hadn't made a scene. But as the morning wore into lunch, the restaurant began to change in ways too subtle to immediately name. A reservation was canceled at the last minute, then another, then three. The sommelier stepped into the kitchen with a pale expression and murmured something about a distributor pulling a contract. A health inspector appeared around 3 p.m., flashing a badge no one had expected and asking questions no one had answers to. By dinner service, the floor manager was sweating under his collar, snapping at staff, double-checking inventory reports, and muttering about permits and liabilities. Lana tried to stay out of his way, tried to do her job and keep her head down. But every time she passed the window table, the table where Marissa had sat, her stomach twisted into knots. She started to wonder if the room itself remembered, if the table remembered, if it was still warm from the echo of what she'd done. The next morning, a food blogger with 1 million followers posted a vague tweet. Funny how some fine dining establishments treat black women like uninvited guests until the reviews start tanking. The tweet didn't name Maison de Claire, but the comments did. Screenshots of the coffee incident, blurred photos snapped discreetly from the bar, began circulating. One showed Marissa mid-wipe, her dress stained, her face unreadable. Another showed Lana, mouth open in mock surprise, coffee cup still tilted. And beneath them, the captions bloomed like wildfire. "We see you. This ain't 1960. She handled it better than I ever could." Lana's hands shook as she scrolled. She told herself it was just the internet, that it would blow over, that people didn't care about things for more than 24 hours. But even as she thought it, she knew better. Because this wasn't noise, it was precision. Someone had released those images. Someone had fed them into the right channels. Someone who knew exactly what they were doing. That evening, a table of regulars, old money types, who usually tipped in hundreds, left without saying goodbye. One of them, a silver-haired man in a bespoke suit, gave Lana a brief look before leaving. Not cruel, not kind, just knowing. As if he recognized her now not as a server, but as a liability. In the break room, Lana tried to hold it together. She paced. She stared at the wall. She asked herself how this could be happening, how one spilled cup of coffee could unravel an entire floor plan. But deep down, she knew it wasn't about the coffee. It was about the message. Marissa hadn't needed to shout. She hadn't needed to file a complaint. All she had to do was leave and wait. The silence was the point. The silence was the strategy. By the end of the week, the general manager, who hadn't taken a day off in months, disappeared without warning. HR reps arrived in press suits, asking too many questions and avoiding too many eyes. A luxury wine supplier canceled their account with the restaurant, citing values misalignment. The owner's name, once a staple of local lifestyle magazines, appeared in a headline linking him to questionable offshore accounts. No one said Marissa's name, but Lana felt her everywhere. One afternoon, she stepped outside during her break, lit a cigarette she'd sworn she'd quit, and stared across the street without really seeing it. She was unraveling. The walls were closing in. The house she'd protected with lies and careful smiles was crumbling one silent brick at a time. And the worst part was, she didn't even know how deep the damage went. She had underestimated Marissa badly. She had mistaken elegance for weakness and restraint for indifference. She had assumed the woman sitting at that table was just another customer, someone who would take the humiliation and walk away. But Marissa hadn't walked away from anything. She had walked through it. Lana flicked ash onto the pavement and tried to breathe. Her phone buzzed in her apron pocket. A message from a number she didn't recognize lit up the screen. No name, no emoji, just a single line. Still think it was just coffee. Lana's throat went dry. She looked around, scanning the sidewalk, the windows above, the passing faces. No one looked back. She shoved the phone into her pocket and went inside, heart pounding so hard she could hear it echo in her ears. That night, she served with robotic precision, barely speaking, barely blinking. She avoided the window table entirely, even though it stayed empty the whole shift, as if waiting for someone who no longer needed to return. And when she finally left, long after the last guest had gone, she passed that table one more time. The candle had burned low. The linen had been changed. But Lana swore she could still smell coffee. Marissa hadn't raised her voice. She hadn't thrown a fit. She hadn't pressed charges, demanded apologies, or made threats. But she had responded with silence, with reach, and with strategy. She had cracked the foundation of a place built to exclude her, and she'd done it without ever needing to come back. Lana wasn't fired, not yet, but for the first time in her life, she understood what it meant to live beneath someone's quiet shadow. And that shadow was growing darker every day. It was the quiet places that felt the loudest now. The boutique bookstore on East 70th had never been crowded. One of those narrow wood-paneled corners of the city where paper still mattered, and the lighting was soft enough to slow time. Lana didn't go there often, but today she walked in like she needed to hide, not shop. Her shift had ended early, another cancellation had come through, and the manager didn't even fake concern. She had drifted here as if drawn by instinct, needing a place that didn't reek of candle wax, fine linens, and ruined silk. She stood between shelves of memoirs and political biographies, her fingers grazing the spines of hardcovers she couldn't afford and hadn't heard of. Her mind buzzed in fragmented loops, tweets, stares, that text message, the missed calls from HR, the strange look the owner's wife gave her yesterday. It all stacked in layers that felt less like consequences and more like a countdown. And in the quiet of that narrow aisle, beneath the low hum of jazz playing somewhere near the front desk, Lana let her shoulders drop and closed her eyes. When she opened them, she saw a reflection, not in a mirror, but in the polished glass of the cabinet across from her. A silhouette stood silently at the end of the row. Tall, composed, familiar. She turned slowly. Marissa stood there, wearing black. Gone was the gold silk and soft glamour. Now she wore a fitted coat that fell mid-calf, her hair pulled back in a low knot, understated and elegant. There was no trace of coffee stains, no sign of confrontation. Only stillness, like she'd been carved from stone and decided to walk among the living again. Lana's mouth went dry. Her first instinct was to speak, to apologize again, or maybe explain, but Marissa beat her to it. "I didn't expect to find you here," she said evenly, her voice smooth, not unkind, just clear. Lana blinked. "I didn't expect to see you again." Marissa offered a faint smile. "That's the thing about consequences. They don't care what we expect. Lana glanced around, suddenly aware of how close the walls felt. Are you following me? She asked, immediately regretting the question. Marissa's smile didn't change. No, but I had a feeling you might end up somewhere like this. People who are unraveling tend to seek out quiet spaces. The sentence landed harder than it should have. Lana stiffened. Is that what you think? That I'm falling apart? Marissa stepped forward, just enough to narrow the space between them. I don't have to think about it. I can see it. Lana looked away, furious at how easily her emotions betrayed her. She felt transparent, as if her very presence had turned into confession. I made a mistake, she said finally, her voice low. The coffee, the way I acted, it wasn't okay. Marissa studied her face carefully. No, it wasn't. But it wasn't the coffee. It was the choice. Lana swallowed. You sat in that chair like you belonged there. Marissa nodded slowly. Because I did. You just didn't believe I could. The truth of it stung more than accusation ever could. Lana wanted to fight back, to claim stress or pressure or any of the 1,000 excuses she'd been spinning in her head for days. But none of them held water under Marissa's gaze. So she said the only honest thing left. You destroyed everything. The restaurant, the press, the suppliers, the tweets. You pulled all the strings. Marissa didn't flinch. No, I didn't destroy it. I revealed it. It was already rotting. All I did was open a window and let the world smell what was inside. Lana shook her head, but it wasn't denial. It was frustration. Why me? Why not the manager? The owner? You made me the face of it. You made yourself the face of it, Marissa said calmly. You were the one who poured the coffee. I simply didn't stop the truth from spreading. There was a long pause, thick with the weight of all the things they didn't say. Finally, Lana asked, so why talk to me now? Why come here at all? Marissa tilted her head. Because I want to offer you a chance. Not forgiveness, not sympathy, but purpose. Lana frowned. What kind of purpose? Marissa pulled a small envelope from her coat and handed it over without ceremony. Inside is everything you need to know about the restaurant's offshore accounts. Names, numbers, laundering trails. I couldn't reach them from the outside, but someone on the inside still can. Lana stared at the envelope like it might burn her fingers. You want me to be your whistleblower? Marissa raised an eyebrow. I want you to choose whether you're going to keep protecting a system that chews people up, or if you're finally ready to stand for something. Lana hesitated. Her instincts screamed to refuse, to walk away, to shut down the conversation and reclaim what little normalcy she had left. But the word normal didn't mean anything anymore. Not after Marissa, not after what she'd seen herself become. She took the envelope. Marissa nodded once, the smallest gesture of approval. This isn't about revenge anymore, she said. It's about exposure, and exposure always starts from within. Lana didn't answer. She couldn't. Her fingers tightened around the envelope, her jaw locked, her pulse rising. For a moment, they stood there in the aisle, two women on opposite sides of a crack that had already split the ground beneath them. And then, without another word, Marissa turned and walked away, her heels silent on the old wooden floor. She didn't look back. Lana didn't move for a long time. She just stood there holding something far heavier than a few sheets of paper, staring into the space Marissa had left behind. The air smelled like old books and dust, but underneath it all, something sharper lingered, change, and it had just been handed to her. The envelope sat on Lana's kitchen table like a lit fuse. She hadn't opened it, not yet, but she could feel the weight of it pressing into the room. It was just paper, she told herself, ink and fiber, but it held something more volatile than gasoline. Her apartment was silent except for the faint hum of her refrigerator and the ticking of the second-hand clock on the wall. And yet her ears rang with thoughts that wouldn't settle. She paced for a while, circling the table, arms crossed tight like she was bracing for impact. She wasn't sure what scared her more, what was inside the envelope, or what it meant that she hadn't already thrown it away. When she finally sat down and slid her finger beneath the seal, her hands were steady, but her breath wasn't. The documents inside were methodical, clinical, and damning. Names she recognized, bank account numbers in the Cayman Islands, false invoices from ghost catering companies, payments labeled as consulting that lined up perfectly with high-end reservation drops. The restaurant wasn't just a place for overpriced food, it was a laundromat wrapped in chandeliers and white linen, and she had been part of it, even if she'd never seen the machine behind the curtain. Lana ran her fingers through her hair, leaning back in her chair as the weight of what Marissa had entrusted her with settled onto her chest. It wasn't just evidence, it was leverage, power, a different kind of weapon than the one she'd used with that coffee cup, but just as deliberate. The difference was, this time she had a choice, and that choice terrified her. She could go to the authorities, sure. That was the obvious route, but the restaurant had deep ties, donors, backdoor deals, political handshakes, and expensive suits. A single phone call might just bury the whole thing, and her with it. No, if she was going to move, she'd have to move smart. She'd have to become the thing she thought she hated. Calculated, strategic, precise. She would have to become like Marissa. It started with a burner email. She created a new address, encrypted, untraceable, and used it to send a handful of documents, just enough to raise suspicion, to an anonymous journalist who specialized in corporate corruption. The reply came within an hour. "Let's talk." No name, just a signal. Lana responded with a date, time, and a neutral location. The coffee shop near her mother's rehab clinic, the one with no cameras and spotty Wi-Fi. She knew how this worked now. She understood the importance of shadows. Over the next several days, Lana operated in two worlds. At Maison de Claire, she smiled, nodded, and poured wine as if nothing had changed, even though every reservation that came in made her stomach tighten. There were whispers about another supplier pulling out, about a pending inspection, about a few wealthy clients suddenly distancing themselves from the brand. The owner stormed through the kitchen one afternoon, shouting into a phone and red-faced with rage. Lana served his table that night with a calm that felt foreign but powerful. She said, "Yes, sir," while knowing the floor beneath him was cracking. In the other world, the hidden one, she worked with the journalist to verify, connect, and expose. They used encrypted messages and burner calls, never naming names unless necessary. She learned how to trace wire transfers, how to confirm shell company addresses, and how to cross-reference supplier lists with campaign contributions. She wasn't just giving up evidence anymore. She was building a case. The journalist was thorough, professional, and relentless. "This is big," he messaged once, like career-ending big. Lana didn't reply. She didn't want praise. She wanted the rot to surface. What surprised her most was the sense of clarity she felt. It wasn't peace. There was too much adrenaline for that, but it was purpose and it was clean. For the first time in years, she wasn't just reacting. She wasn't surviving shift to shift or shrinking under the weight of someone else's power. She was choosing, and each choice was carving a new shape out of the old bitter mold she'd let harden around her life. But clarity didn't mean safety. One night, as she stepped out of the back exit after closing, she noticed a black sedan parked across the street. It hadn't been there earlier. The windows were tinted and the engine was off, but she could feel the eyes inside. She didn't run. She didn't panic. She walked slowly to her car, kept her hands visible, and drove a different route home, changing directions 3 times before pulling into a gas station and sitting for 20 minutes under the fluorescent lights pretending to scroll her phone. That night, she slept with the documents in a fireproof envelope beneath her bed. The journalist promised the article was coming soon, that it had been verified by legal, that they had corroborating sources, and at least one name willing to go on record. "When it drops," he said, "they'll scramble." Lana nodded to herself, alone in her kitchen, the envelope still under her bed, her phone face down on the counter. She felt the storm approaching, one she had helped build with her own hands. The next morning, the maitre d' was mysteriously absent, his locker cleaned out and nameplate removed. No one spoke about it. Another server quit mid-shift without warning. A health inspector walked in mid-dinner service, clipboard in hand, and didn't smile once. Lana kept serving, kept watching, kept quiet. That evening, after the last table cleared, she stood alone in the dining room, staring at the empty window table. The one Marissa had once claimed like it was always hers. For the first time, Lana understood the silence Marissa had wielded that night. It wasn't weakness. It was precision. It was control. And now Lana had it too. She wasn't done yet, but she had made her move, and the counterstrike had already begun. The story broke just after sunrise. It wasn't loud at first. No headlines screamed. No alarms went off. It began like a whisper cutting through static, an anonymous expose published by an independent digital magazine known for taking down institutions too smug to guard their backs. The headline was simple: Fine Dining, Dirty Money, How Luxury Restaurants Hide the Truth in Plain Sight. Beneath it were files, diagrams, insider interviews, and damning evidence. Much of it Lana had helped deliver. At first, the restaurant staff didn't react. The article hadn't named Maison de Claire directly, but the photos did. The menu font, the chandelier, the infamous window table. People knew. By noon, the article had been picked up by 4 major outlets. An hour later, it hit trending status across social media. And by dinner service, the press trucks had begun to circle like vultures that had smelled death in linen napkins and $600 wine pairings. Customers canceled in waves, citing personal scheduling issues and family emergencies that rang hollow. The reservations list, once full for weeks, now looked like a chessboard abandoned mid-game. Cooks whispered in the kitchen, servers glanced over shoulders, and Lana moved like a ghost through it all. Present but unseen, the one who knew the ending before the final act began. That night, the owner finally showed up. He hadn't been seen in days. Now his tailored suit was wrinkled, his collar stained with sweat, and his temper ran hot enough to burn every corner of the restaurant. He stormed through the dining area, barked orders no one understood, and threatened legal action against every gossip-hungry rat who thought they could bring down legacy with a blog post. But even as he spoke, the power had already shifted. The staff didn't rush to appease him. The chefs didn't flinch. The servers no longer bowed. Respect had drained from the room like blood from a fresh wound, and Lana could feel it. It pulsed in the silence. She watched from behind the bar as the Maître d's replacement tried to smooth things over with the last remaining guests. They were a couple from New Jersey, clearly unaware of the chaos that had rooted itself into the restaurant's foundations. The man asked if there would be a wine pairing, but the cellar was locked now, temporarily under audit, as the new sommelier carefully phrased it. The woman asked why the dining room felt so tense. No one answered. Lana thought about telling her that tension has a taste, and once you notice it, you can't untaste it. But instead, she poured the water, set the menu down, and walked away. In the break room, the managers huddled around phones, eyes glued to incoming emails and notifications. Lawsuits were being prepared. Investors were jumping ship. One supplier had already filed a request for breach of contract damages. A former chef had gone on record in an evening news segment, confirming the laundering practices mentioned in the article. A bartender, freshly fired just days ago, posted a video claiming tips had been skimmed for years. And beneath it all, comment after comment poured in from diners who now saw the signs and felt uncomfortable long before anyone admitted it. Collapse didn't come with an explosion. It came like a tide, slow, heavy, and impossible to stop. Lana kept working. She polished glassware, cleaned cutlery, and took drink orders from the few remaining loyalists, still pretending the dining room didn't stink of fear. But her body moved on instinct, and her mind stayed on Marissa. Somewhere out there, she knew Marissa was watching. Not from a distance, not from spite, but from precision. This wasn't revenge. This was execution. Every blow was deliberate, every silence strategic, and Lana, once the servant of the machine, had helped dismantle it, gear by gear. Around midnight, a man in a suit entered with a clipboard and a badge. Not a health inspector this time, but an IRS auditor. He didn't announce himself loudly. He didn't need to. The way the owner's face fell when he saw him said more than words ever could. There were whispers of offshore accounts, frozen assets, and unreported earnings. Someone in accounting went pale and locked themselves in the office. A dishwasher quit on the spot and walked out the back door without even collecting their final check. Lana stepped outside for air. The alley behind the restaurant was quiet, littered with cigarette butts and soggy receipt paper. She lit one herself, breathing in the bite of nicotine like it might steady her heartbeat. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, but she didn't check it. She knew who it was. Marissa hadn't texted again since the day she handed Lana the envelope, but somehow Lana felt her presence in every tremor that rippled through the foundation of the restaurant. The text would be short: confirmation, closure, or maybe not. Maybe Marissa would never speak to her again, and maybe that was the point. When she walked back in, the dining room was empty. No guests, no music, just flickering candles and the faint echo of a life unraveling. The owner was gone, slipped out through the back during Lana's smoke break, leaving behind his jacket and a half-empty glass of scotch. The remaining staff sat in silence, watching a live news segment on one of their phones. The headline scrolled beneath the anchor's face like a quiet scream: Luxury Restaurant Empire Under Federal Investigation Following Whistleblower Leak. Lana didn't smile. There was nothing triumphant in her bones. She simply walked to the center of the room, looked at the window table, and pulled the linen cloth off with one smooth motion. Beneath it, the wooden surface still bore a faint ring from the coffee cup that had started everything. No one else saw it. No one else knew what it meant. But she did. And in that moment, Lana understood something she'd never grasped before. Collapse isn't the end. It's just the final proof that something else has taken control. The coffee shop wasn't glamorous. It was a converted newsstand tucked under the awning of a subway entrance in Brooklyn, where trains screamed below and pigeons bickered above. The paint peeled in the corners, and the counter was scratched with time. But Lana liked it that way. It felt honest. The kind of place where everything visible had a story. None of them perfect, all of them real. She wiped down the counter with a steady hand, steam rising from a fresh brew behind her. There was no wine list, no linen, no gold accents, just a worn chalkboard that read, "No judgment, just coffee." She had been running the stand for 3 weeks now. It wasn't much, but it was hers. She rented the space monthly from a retired butcher who only asked that she close before dusk and never sell anything with syrups he couldn't pronounce. Lana agreed. She didn't want syrups anymore. She didn't want tips based on performance or smiles that covered resentment. She just wanted hot coffee, real conversation, and a chance to serve without pretending. The city felt different from this angle. Slower, closer to the sidewalk. People came here in sneakers and wrinkled coats, not cufflinks and cashmere scarves. They didn't ask for sparkling water or truffle foam. They asked for warmth, a cup to go, a moment of peace before the day dragged them back into chaos. Lana had learned to remember their names, their orders, their allergies, and their kids' birthdays. No more hiding behind trays and titles. No more power games behind chandeliers. And yet, even in this simpler world, her past didn't vanish. She still saw echoes of Maison de Claire in the way someone adjusted their sleeve, or how a certain tone of voice could shift a room. She still dreamt of Marissa sometimes, never vividly, never violently, but just enough to wake her with a strange calmness in her chest. It wasn't guilt anymore. It wasn't even fear. It was something closer to reverence. That morning the sky was gray but dry. Commuters moved with their usual rhythm, hurried but not frantic. Lana prepped the espresso station, restocked paper cups, and scribbled a small quote on the chalkboard beneath the menu: strong coffee and stronger choices. She didn't expect anyone to notice, but it made her smile as she poured herself a black cup and leaned against the side window to sip. She almost didn't see her. The woman blended in, wearing a soft brown coat, hair tied back, no gold, no makeup, no shimmer, just presence. But even without the sheen of silk or the weight of reputation, Lana recognized her instantly. Marissa stood at the edge of the sidewalk, glancing at the stand as if considering something deeper than caffeine. And when her eyes met Lana's, there was no shock, no tension, just quiet understanding that flowed between them, like steam from the open lid of a fresh pour. Lana didn't speak. She didn't wave. She simply reached for a cup, filled it, and slid it across the counter just as Marissa stepped forward. "Black, no sugar," Lana said softly. Marissa accepted it with a single nod. She didn't reach for her wallet. She didn't ask how much. Instead, she turned the cup slightly, reading the words scribbled just below the rim in Lana's careful handwriting. "To the woman who never spilled." For a moment they stood in that pause. Strangers no longer, adversaries no more. Lana didn't apologize again. Marissa didn't offer absolution. They didn't need it. The world they had built and burned had already said enough. "You've been watching," Lana said finally, her voice steady but low. Marissa sipped the coffee and smiled. "Of course I have. I don't start something I don't intend to see through." Lana nodded. "It worked." Marissa glanced around. "I can see that." The words weren't meant to praise. They were acknowledged. Two people who had seen each other at their worst, now standing in the aftermath of something larger than either of them. And in that aftermath, a new structure had taken shape. Quiet, unshakable, forged not from forgiveness, but from truth. Marissa turned to leave, then paused. "You did more than pour the coffee," she said, not looking back. "You cleaned up the stain?" Lana didn't reply. She just watched as Marissa disappeared into the morning crowd, the steam from her cup trailing behind her like a memory. The next customer asked for a latte, and Lana smiled, grabbed the pitcher, and returned to her station. The line grew. The noise returned. But something had shifted. She no longer felt like a woman carrying a secret. She felt like someone who had set one down. Later that day, she added one more line to the chalkboard, just below the quote, "Owned by someone who chose better." And for the first time in years, the words felt true. Thank you for joining us on this unforgettable journey through the wrong table. From silent tension to whispered revenge, from spilled coffee to reclaimed power. This story reminds us how much can change with one choice, one voice, and one quiet storm. If Marissa's silence spoke to you, or Lana's transformation made you reflect, we'd love to hear your thoughts. What would you have done? Did justice find its way in the end? Share your reflections in the comments. We read every single one. And if this story moved you, inspired you, or made you see the world just a little differently, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Thank you for being part of this experience. We'll see you next time with a new tale, a new truth, and just maybe another cup of black coffee.